Bom dia para quem é de bom dia, boa noite para quem é da boa noite, good morning for the good morning guys, good night for the good night guys, because today it's English time. Hoje a gente vai apresentar um programa mega legal com uma convidada inglesa ou holandesa, não sei, Bárbara. Eu não tô nessa, mas vai falar inglesa. De templo inglesa. E a gente vai falar sobre telema, sobre feminismo, sobre John Fortune, sobre tudo. Mas para você entender, você precisa vir aqui e colocar Start Subtitle e depois trocar para português. E aí o YouTube traduz para você. And now in English. Hello, welcome, Georgia. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me on the show tonight.
Well, first of all, I will introduce the other guests because now we are several of us. When we started in the pandemic, it was only me, but I am a shitty entertainer. So I got a lot of new guests who are much better than I. So let's say hello to Ulisses Massad from enochiano.com.
Hi guys, it's nice to be here. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about John Fortune and Thelemic and Babalon.
And from the evil side of sudden death, or morte súbita, Thiago Tamosauskas.
Hi guys, sudden death is a great name in English, but it's a pleasure to be here tonight, and we are really honored to receive such a special guest.
And from the Ecclesia Babalon, Barbara Vox.
Hello, good evening. It's very nice to have Georgia here tonight. It's a special night for me as a Babalon priestess, and I'm sure it's going to be great to look into the abyss.
Well, Georgia, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. And the first question that we always ask is about your personal journey. In Portuguese, we usually joke with our guests about, you say when you're a kid, you go to the church, talk to the priest, etc. And then 20, 30 years later, you're a Satanist Thelemic, has an evil temple. And how did that work? What's your personal journey?
Okay, so it's interesting to think about in those terms. I didn't grow up particularly Christian. I'm from England, and I grew up in a very secular household. I was always fascinated by religion of all kinds, and I did a school project on Egyptian religion and things like this. And so when I went to university, I decided that I didn't want to study philosophy. I wanted to study theology. And I did a 4-year degree in Christian theology. And I studied things like church history and morality. And I just thought it was absolutely fascinating. But I was very frustrated that we only ever spoke about Christian theology. And I wanted to know about all the different perspectives with which one could look at the gods. And I one day discovered a poster in my college that had, it's a very famous picture. You might know the one I'm speaking of. It's a medieval painting, and it's of a man with his head sticking out of the bubble. You know, the whole of the earth is inside this great bubble, and he's got his little head sticking out. And I thought it was the most fascinating picture. And it was an advert for a course on esotericism. And I'd never heard of esotericism. And I was like, wow, there's a whole part of religion that I haven't even heard of yet. So I went off and I Googled what it was. And I just thought it was the most incredible thing I'd ever heard of. So I applied. And I ended up doing my master's degree at Amsterdam, the University of Amsterdam, in esotericism. I hadn't had any contact with the occult in any form before that. But when I was doing my degree, a lot of the people who were also doing it alongside me were practitioners, and there were some, pagans of various kinds, but most of the people were actually Thelemites and members of the OTO. And when we began studying Crowley and Fortune and the sort of 20th century manifestations of occult, that was for me a sort of big moment. And I was like, okay, now this is stuff that I could really get into. And it was in that period that I had or actually during that exact class where we were looking at Crowley's Invocations of Babylon in the Desert in Algeria that I had one of my first ever visions or sort of visionary experiences of what I now recognize was the goddess Babalon. So as I sort of continued my studies, I also began practicing. I took a brief break to have my first son, and sort of following the craziness of the first year of that, I really dove into sort of magical practice. I got involved with the OTO and a lot of local occult and pagan groups in the UK. I ended up meeting my husband through online Thelemic forums, exchanging poetry and words about Babalon. I had, I don't know if I want to go into too much detail with it about here, but myself and other members of the OTO had some disagreements and I chose to leave. And my husband and I now run Temple of Our Lady of the Abyss, which is a pagan and occult temple, a magical working group dedicated to the mysteries of the goddess Babalon.
All right, so after this introduction, I have to ask the most important question. Who is Babalon and what does it mean to be her priestess?
You have to ask, who is she? I don't know. I wish I did. That would be wonderful. And I definitely would like to spend a significant portion of my life discovering the answers to that question. One of the things that I find so fascinating about her as a divinity, as a personality, is that you cannot simply say Babalon is X, Babalon is Y, because anything that you can say about her, the opposite is always also true. So she's a whore and she's a virgin, she's a mother and she's barren, she's good and she's evil, she's white and she's black, she's all of them. And to me, that is just the most fascinating and amazing and mysterious thing. And that's one of the many reasons that I love her. In terms of what it means to be a Babalon priestess, I don't know if you can say that it means or looks like one thing, because I think it's different for every single person who undertakes that journey. I think if I've learned one thing, it requires a huge amount of honesty with yourself, because you cannot be a priestess of Babalon while living your own lies that you tell to yourself, because there's no freedom in that. But beyond that principle, I don't feel that I would know how to tell someone how to be a Babalon priestess. I guess, yes.
And you talk about Babalon has a lot of faces, and I'm really interested in the faces you saw. So my question is, how was your first or more important experience with Babalon?
So that very, very first vision I described, I wouldn't say was necessarily a vision of her in a clear sense. It was an idea about some kind of a ritual. My first really, but you just made me realize that wasn't my first ever mystical experience. My first and perhaps most potent visionary experience, as opposed to perhaps experiences that come about during ritual or something similar, happened on the Isle of Mull, which is a small Scottish island where I was camping with a friend, and we'd stayed up too late and drank too much, and we were smoking cigarettes and staring at the stars, and I had an incredible vision of a goddess who was shifting. I'm not sure how else to put it, but sort of like the Thoth card, priestess card from the Thoth tarot deck. She was like, it's such a difficult thing to try and explain. Like some kind of crazy psychedelic image where these four images of the goddess, and they're all shifting and combining across each other. And it's interesting, I'd never thought about it in that way before, but it absolutely, I've laid it, yes, that sort of level of you know, the throne almost looks like extra legs, and the veil almost looks like extra arms. She had all of that going on. And it, to me, exactly signifies that Babalon, the goddess, is not one single figure and cannot be seen as a single figure, even in her like most basic isness, most basic being. She's already multiple. And there can't be just sort of a single representation of her, I think.
That's beautiful.
Georgia, I have a question from Bruno. He said if you could talk to us about how was the Thelemic scenario when you started. What year was that, and how was things in England?
How was, sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question?
The Thelemic scenario.
Oh, the Thelemic scenario. In the sense of sort of the British.
In the sense of
historical
purpose. He's a historian. And he always asks this kind of things to position everything in time and space, and how was everything happening?
I don't know. I mean, it was OTOing away quite happily, and I came and made a big old fuss and really upset a lot of old men. You know, I tend to do that. I have a habit of doing things like that, in fact. I don't know how to talk about it maybe in a more general historical sense, but definitely with regards to why I saw it as so problematic is I don't feel like, at least in the UK, and definitely having moved to America, it's quite different. And I'm sure it's different again in Portugal. There was a lot of lip service without a lot of, you know, anything underneath. And in America, it can become quite like a social club. But the problem in England was it had become like its own little hierarchical church. It's very small, very, very top heavy. People were just desperate to advance. And so really the idea of advancement came before sort of the more meaningful levels of initiation, I felt. And people weren't making commitments in the way that I would consider calling oneself a Thelemite implies, you know, a commitment to will and a commitment to love. And I didn't see a lot of that. I can talk more specific things, but I wouldn't, you'd have to let me know which aspect.
Right. So talking about this, many Thelemic groups further themselves from the word religion, but you at Templum Abyssi and us at Ecclesia Babalon, we embrace it. We always say we are a religious institution. So how do you view religiosity, religion, Thelema as a religion, and the importance of embracing this?
I think, and I mean, I'm sure I'm going to offend or upset somebody saying this, but the reason that, you know, contemporary spirituality doesn't want to be called religion, the reason that Thelema doesn't want to be called religion is because people have complexes around Christianity. I mean, that is the reason. There is no real reason or distinction beyond that. Saying that, you know, a religion is not a religion is some kind of weird post-colonial thing where we like to other what we're doing or what they're doing away from traditional forms of Christianity, which is fine, but people need to recognize that it's a matter of discourse rather than anything about the traditions themselves. In the case of Thelema, it always drove me mad that there would be people who called themselves atheist magicians, because I'm like, the fuck, the gods are the most fun part of the whole thing. I don't know if I can curse, I'm sorry, but that is the most fun part. And when you remove that reality and that sort of those larger forces behind things, it becomes very shallow and it becomes more like a game. Oh yes, I can do these things and it's going to have this psychological effect. Well, so do drugs. So what then is ritual doing that you can't find an easier way to achieve? Well, what it's doing is it's giving you experience of the divine, and saying the divine doesn't exist while actively pursuing it is sort of problematic to me. I definitely think when it comes to Babalon, the ability to say this is not a religion and this is not a god really starts to break down, because anybody who has a direct experience with her, is pretty immediately aware that this is not something manifesting in their fucking brain. So, you know, coming out of that experience and going like, you know, it probably was just in my head. It just doesn't happen. You do not see that. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've been able to go, you know, we're just going to embrace that label, because it would just be absurd to try and run from it at this point. And I don't think the concept of religion needs to change. I think the way that the world sort of assumes Christianity as the base religion is the problem, rather than anything about, you know, religion in itself. But that I'm sure would be quite a controversial thing to say.
Yeah, but I totally agree. So talking about this, then what is the difference between an institution which is going to be primarily religious and a secret order in your point of view?
That's an interesting one. And it's something myself and my husband spoke about a lot when we were trying to form the Companions, our working group, because we wanted some kind of, you know, group attached to the temple, but we didn't want to order. And so it was like, how do we do magical group outside of that whole schema? And we spent a long time thinking about it, about what you would call it, about what it would look like, about what it would entail. And that's why we ended up settling on the Companions and the formula that we have with them, which requires more commitment up front, in the sense that you have to put in effort. You have to write an essay and undergo an interview, but there are no initiations. There are initiations, but, you know, they're not ritual initiations in the same way the OTO has them. And I think it's a really interesting question. If they were done properly, there would not be a clear distinction between a religious group and what is called an occult order. The order is just the inner aspect of the religion, as you find in many religions. A really obvious one would be Judaism and Kabbalah, right? It's just an inner practice. But I think the problem is people don't want true initiation, which can take years and you can fail at. People want to pay some money and have a nice 2-hour ceremony. And now I have this little plaque on my wall that says I'm a master magician, and isn't it great? And it's not a real initiation. And that's where that divide starts forming. When you think that you can hand out or lay hands and change somebody's spiritual journey, then you've gone off, you know, veered off the path of, I don't like the idea of true religion, but of true will, call it, you know. Mort, that's not your name.
Would you be so kind to use your knowledge about history of religions to make a forecast about Thelema or the occult scenario, let's say 50 years from now? Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
About Thelema, I'm quite a pessimist. I don't see that it has grown in the past 100 years, and I don't believe that it's going to turn around and suddenly figure out how to do what it should have been doing. However, but I mean, I would be very open to being pleasantly surprised in that regard. I do think that paganism as a whole is massively coming to the fore. You know, the popularity of witchcraft, you know, it's a source of a lot of complaint. People get really arsy, like, oh, every teenager has tarot cards now. And you're like, yeah, that's what major religious and cultural change looks like. And it's fucking awesome. Like, come on. But I do think we have the potential to use that new impetus to have, you know, groups of serious practitioners being able to use that to strengthen what they're doing and to sort of become leaders, or at least become, you know, a place that people can go when they get tired of witch talk. But there is also, I think, the potential for a pretty thorough backlash if things go bad. I do believe that we have entered in what might be considered a pagan age. I don't think that that's going to turn around. And I do think that the ideas of Crowley and the ideas of fortune and the practices of Thelema are all going to get integrated into this new thing. And I think it's likely that we're going to see much more of this broad paganism that is quite commercialized, that takes a lot of things from different sources. But I also think that's not necessarily the terrible thing that people seem to make out.
And what about the current 156? Is that the way to make the lima grow back, well, into being what it has always been supposed to be after all?
You know, so I can answer you as a historian and a scholar, or I can answer you as a priestess. That particular one is difficult to answer together, because the scholar of me would say that is definitely an important thread in that's completely, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. That's definitely an important thread, but is it going to change things? Because the biggest, to me, not problem, but difficulty in sharing the 156 current lot widely is it's difficult. It's difficult to engage with. It requires not necessarily, you know, like a degree in book learning, but it requires reflection on self. And like I said, honesty. And I think those things are really hard to enact on a really wide scale, or can be. By the other token, as priestess, I absolutely think that the 156 current is going to be a major player, is already a major player. It is one of the major inner forces that's motivating a lot of what's going on at the moment. I feel, I like to call Babalon Our Lady of the Apocalypse, because she is an apocalyptic goddess. She is the divine force of the Anthropocene. You know, the world is falling apart, and it's her. She is the manifestation of Mother Nature dying and Mother Nature wreaking havoc because of what we've done. And to me, that actually is who Babalon is. So everything that we see now in the world, fires and war, these are actually physical manifestations of the fury of Our Lady, if you like.
We talk about apocalypse. So I have a question about the book of Revelations. On Christianity, there is a common image of the woman of the Judgment Day stepping or smashing the serpent's head, the snake head. And in the Templum Abyssi emblem, there is a snake also, and we know about the sacred woman. So this image of the woman and the snake is reinterpreted or read in a different way from the Christianity. What it means, the snake in the emblem.
So I hadn't thought of it in terms of the snake of Revelations or the sort of biblical snake of knowledge, but it definitely partakes of those. The snake in the emblem is the path of the serpent up the tree of life. So it's the path of knowledge that comes up from the body towards the divine, as opposed to the sword of wisdom, which descends from divinity. So that's sort of where that came from. And that was a creation of my husband, Nemo's, which was given to him by Our Lady. And then he had designed and drawn up.
So he's indeed in the foot of the woman.
Yeah, like I said, I hadn't thought of it like that, but it totally works. I like that.
You're muted.
Sorry. I'd like to make a question in the same line that Thiago said. You talk about Babylon and Apocalypse. I would like to know your opinion about the relation between Babylon and the John Dee journals. Do you have, if there is some relation or not?
Did you did you say Dee's journals?
Yes.
So yep, that is the first historical record of Babylon being spelt with a second A, as opposed to Babylon being spelt with a Y, is found in John Dee's diaries. The actual name appears in I can't remember so he was scrying the ethers with his seer Kelly, and they met a young girl named Madimi, who showed them through the subsequent ethers. And near the end of this process, they meet a shining golden figure who is called Babalon. And that is the first appearance of her name spelt like that, until sort of Crowley picked it back up later. Dee didn't seem to make terribly much of it. He was much more interested in Madimi and the other weird things he was doing in the period. But it was a huge influence on Crowley. And when Crowley went off to scry the ethers, first in Mexico, somewhere in South America, and then in Algeria, he was very much directly taken from Dee, and he took these calls and Dee's method and reinterpreted it for himself and sort of did it. And that's how he had the beautiful visions of Babalon that are found in A Vision in the Voice.
All right, now let's go to the hardcore questions.
No, Barbara, before the hardcore questions, I have some questions here. Could you explain a little bit what is current 156? The basic that there are some people who never heard about it.
That's actually not really a phrase that I use terribly much, but I'm, aware of it. So it came from, people talk about the 93 current, which is the current of Thelema. And by current, they mean not just people who are actively practicing Thelema, but the way that Thelema has influenced particularly music, movies, and literature and art. So the current 156 is a sort of offshoot of this, and it's focused on goddess Babalon, who was originally a Thelemic goddess, but as she kind of appears now, she's less, or she's not always Thelemic or always seen through that lens. So the 156 current, is people working with either actual practices and devotion to the goddess Babalon, or just utilizing her imagery and her ideas. There's been a lot of art, people making Babalon tarot books that sort of feature her, things like that would all be part of the 156 current.
Thank you.
So, how do you understand the term sacred whore, and how does it approximate and goes further from feminism? How can we view sacred whoredom as a part of a feminist woman's spiritual journey and as a tool to build females' agency?
Those are hard questions. Okay.
I know, but I can't wait to hear your opinion on this.
Would you tell me the questions again so I can?
Yeah, so the first one is, how do you understand the term sacred whore?
Mm-hmm.
And how does it approximate and goes further from feminism?
Approximate what? Sorry, what was the second word after approximate?
And goes further.
Angle. Okay. So the sacred whore is a very complicated topic. And it's a very misunderstood topic that is hugely impacted, particularly by discourses of feminism and also of post-colonialism. I think where I like to start if I'm talking about the holy whore is actually not to talk about feminist concerns, but to talk about the fact that as it was originally conceived, this concept of the hierodule, the sacred prostitute, was something Greek and Roman historians wrote about being a practice by Near Eastern cultures, particularly the Assyrians and the Babylonians, my brain, who it was claimed worshipped the goddess Inanna/Ishtar with sexual rites at the temple. There is no evidence that this was the case. And I've actually read some really interesting stuff to say, it's pretty clear that this wasn't the case, in fact. It's not even clear that the women in ancient Babylon were particularly more sexually free than we are now. The discourse was entirely an orientalizing one about, look at those terrible savages and what they're doing. And I think that this is a really important place to start, because the reason people like this concept, the reason it's difficult to talk about, the reason it's fun to talk about, is that it is this sort of ultimate othering. It's like the worst but most fascinating and possibly best thing anyone can imagine. A holy prostitute, a woman who's having sex, but she's also operating a religious function. We can have religious sex. It gets people all worked up every time. And really at its heart, that's what it's communicating, is that sex is holy and holiness can be erotic, and that those two things don't have to be distinct. But they are so distinct in our culture that just putting the words holy and whore together is this big fucking deal. So that's like my sort of starter spiel on what the holy whore is, historically speaking. In terms of how I use it and we use it, I think with regards to Babalon, the major point about calling her the holy whore, although there are other aspects to it, is this idea of her taking all. She takes all without condition. She doesn't pick and choose. She doesn't say, I don't like this bit of you and I do like this bit of you. She doesn't ask for return. And these are the things, these are the reasons we call her whore. When I first got into Babalon as a young single mom, it was the lack of reciprocity that I thought was really fascinating. I was reading a lot of critical theory, and I thought the idea that she destroys the sort of economic continuity that women are expected to be. You know, you're a mother, your daughter, and then you're a mother, and then your daughter, and then your mother. This whole thing she removes, because she takes everything and she doesn't ask for anything in return. So not only does she not ask for, you know, the idea of security that a family brings, but she also doesn't ask for money. She's not even doing this for sort of economic return. It's this concept of giving and being taken without expectation that is what she embodies, but is also, of course, what she asks of her followers. And so that is sort of like the practical aspect of that. People want it to mean I get to say that my sex is a religious practice. People really want it to mean that. And sex magic is wonderful. Sex magic is great. Everybody should do sex magic. Everybody should be playing with religion and sex in all the ways. But that does not mean that that is what the word holy whore implies at all. Now, I do know people who are sex workers who do sex work specifically in a ritual manner for Babalon. And I think that gets into really, really interesting territory where, you know, I cannot say to my friend who is a Babylonian sex worker that she is not a sacred whore, because she is absolutely, literally a sacred whore. But I think that that is sort of an exception rather than the rule. And I think that there's a big difference between that sort of kind of dedicated and professional approach to, oh, look at me in my red dress, I'm the holy whore, which I see a lot of. And that sort of goes with that witch talk, you know, it's okay to be popular. But the problem, this will go into your next question, I guess, is that people take this for the whole of the thing. And then they take Babalon as this sort of weird aesthetic sexual ideal rather than sort of a devotion practice. And, you know, again, going to the sort of atheism thing, they think that Babalon is them. And that was one of the worst things Crowley did, was say that his fucking girlfriends were avatars of Babalon. He actually never said that they were Babalon, but people misunderstand what an avatar is in that context. And so people are like, oh, I am Babalon. I am Babalon now, wearing my red dress, I've got my skull, got my chalice, I am Babalon, look. And while it is perfectly possible to have incredible experiences of Babalon in the body, no one single person is Babalon. People don't like it when you say that. I've had people react very badly to that. And it's because instead of doing that original work of looking inside, they just looked outside and they never even stopped to check in. So that's the real problem with that term holy whore, which sort of brings us to the concept of it in feminism and in women. I don't know if I would say it's about, you know, feminism as this sort of theory as much as the lived experience of women. What it means, it was supposed to be liberationary. Crowley intended it to be liberation. Look, women, you can have sex, you can dress slutty, it's great, it's even religious, wonderful. The problem is, it has since then become less
revolutionary.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. The revolution happened. We had the revolution. We came out the other side and the discourse didn't change. So now instead of this call to being a holy whore, being this like, wait, what? I can do this amazing new thing. It's like, oh, great. Another man telling me that I really need to be sexy if I'm going to do magic. And it does end up like that. And I mean, that is how it looks for so many women. And I have experienced men saying, no, it's not about that. It's about having the choice. And of course we have the choice. We've had the choice since the 60s. The problem is that it becomes a lack of choice in itself. There's all this pressure that if you're going to be an occultist, and especially if you're going to work with Babalon, you have to be slutty. And you have to take the sexy photos. And obviously you're going to want to have sex with random occult men that you come across, because why would you not? And it has really engendered that whole shit show of a hang on to the 156 current. So when I went to join the OTO, and I discovered not a group of individuals who were, really committed to spiritual growth, but a group of men who really, really wanted to get in my pants repeatedly and would actually actively justify. That's the thing. I mean, fine, guys can be guys, whatever, but to actively turn around and justify it as a religious practice and to say, no, me being horny and perving on everybody who enters this space is actually my religious right as a priest. And if you are going to be a priestess properly, then you need to get in on this. Then that's become a really big problem. And when I raised that issue, people were really horrified with me for raising the issue, because it was like I had ruined the secret. I had ruined it because certain people like this. And they weren't able to change. I can't speak for other OTO groups or groups of Thelemites, but the UK wasn't able to change because the whole structure is based on the idea of using women and not having them as true partner magicians. And the undeniable truth for this is the fact that the OTO's 9th degree does not allow women to take it. I've had people argue with me about that, but realistically, it's a ritual designed for men. And it would have to be massively changed to have a woman undertake it. And to me, that really just stresses that Crowley never thought of women as true magical partners. He didn't understand what it was to be a holy whore. And that his misunderstandings still have a huge influence on Thelemic culture today. I'm going to stop myself there because I've just talked for like
he was stuck in the old eon, and so is a lot of people till now.
Yes.
My turn.
Yes, please.
I have a question here from Andressa, one of our chat participants. She asks, and I quote, regarding the common and occult physiology of the female body, what are the main differences that you perceive in practice of sexual magic by women, whether in the sense of devotional practice, self-transformation, or magic itself?
That's another difficult question. And I would start by saying don't think I can truly answer it because I've not had an experience outside of a woman's body. And I think that that's one of the issues when trying to talk about the different ways that female and male bodies experience sex or magic, is that you're only ever going to have one. Well, most people are only ever going to have one side of that experience. When I was a young magician, when I first started out, I thought that there was this really big difference. I have come to understand that there is a big difference if you're doing OTO sexual magic, because OTO, or I guess I'd call it Crowley's form of sexual magic, really relied on the fluids, the different fluids which are mixed to make the elixir of life. So in that regard, it matters to your gender. I would note that the feminine fluids used in that operation aren't actually sexual fluids at all, because, Crowley didn't understand how women's bodies work. But, so not only do you have to be a woman, but you have to be an actively menstruating woman to take part in Crowley's OTO sex magic. I like to talk more about, I think, we have different bodies. Everybody has a different body. So I think far more interesting than talking about women's bodies and men's bodies and the different things they can do is the differences between every single body. You know, I'm sure that the way that I and you, Barbara, experience, you know, Babalon in the body in both an erotic and magical way is completely different. And that's one of the amazing things about it, is no one's experiences are the same. I think that there are definitely forms of sexual magic where it makes a huge difference. Again, like with the kaulas, where you're making formulas from fluids, anything that's sort of fluidic is going to make a massive difference. Anything outside of that, the longer I stay in the occult world, the more it seems to me that, you know, any body can have masculine and feminine experiences of magic. And that's not as easy as going, I'm going to be masculine in the temple today. It requires true dedication. But I think there's a lot more possibilities held in the body than we often realize.
And talking about the body, well, I'll bring the maternity issue. So maternity has never been on the table for me. I'm not a mom and I don't want to be a mom. So it's very difficult for me to understand what is maternity and how people feel about it. And daily I receive messages from a lot of women saying how they would like to be content creators and occultists, whatever, and they don't have time, they can't, because their life is so difficult right now because they're moms. And well, I try to understand, I try to embrace them, I try to be as empathetic as possible, but I feel like I don't really grasp it. And you are a mom, you are great, you write books, you have a temple. So can you talk about being a mom and an occultist and all this experience?
Yeah. So I have a 6-year-old son, a 1-year-old baby, and a 7-year-old stepdaughter. So I have lots of children. I mean, there's a few different ways to answer that. Being a parent absolutely changes your ability to do certain kinds of magic. So with a young child under, say, 3, you basically can't do ritual magic regularly, because in what world do you have 4 hours of complete freedom and silence in order to get in that space and do that thing? You just don't. You also can't do, you know, I used to go in for like 3-day-long magical retreats. All of that shit is gone, right? I'm lucky if I get 10 minutes a fucking week to meditate. That's not true. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's not something I have a lot of time of. And children are really exhausting. They are. But it's also, I mean, specifically in the case of the kind of people you're saying, I mean, I have those children. I also just managed to finish my PhD, and I have a job, and I run a temple, and I write. It just requires will and desire to keep going, you know, and it's very, very easy. And it makes me sad because I see so many of my friends having children, and that becomes everything. They cannot do anything outside of it because it consumes you. And then it can be very hard to try and find some space for you in that. It's easier to turn that off. It's actually easier to go, no, I have no time, I'll just do this. It's difficult because as soon as you start trying to do things, you realize all the things you can't do. And you realize the ways, you know, that the things that you're not able to do, the person you want to be that you can't be right now. But I think you have to keep trying, or it becomes your entire personality. And having children is not a personality or an achievement, you know, despite what many people say. I do think, however, with regard to, so that's sort of my spiel on, you know, being a magician and a parent, you know, with regard to Babalon and parenthood, though, I think that she gives space to articulate something that's really important that isn't spoken about, which is the negative emotions associated with parenting: resentment, dislike, hatred, you know, depression, all of these things that you feel. And you're holding a baby, you're supposed to love the baby is the best thing ever. You hate the baby, you kind of want to kill the baby has been crying for 6 hours and it won't stop. And you know, it's okay, you're not supposed to be happy all the time, you're not supposed to never resent them, but we don't talk about it as a culture. And so people whisperedly admit, sometimes I hate my baby. And I used to really make a point, almost like a practice, talking about how much I hated my child in a joking tone, you know, but because people need to hear it. People need to hear, I don't like this kid. People need to hear, God, I want to kill this kid. Because other people would go, oh, we're allowed to say that? Yeah, I hate my child too. See, we need to do this. We need to talk about this. And then there's, less nice aspects of it, loss of children, or children you didn't want to have that you were forced to have. These kind of realities exist, and people don't talk about those things. And again, I think Babalon really has a powerful space to find a different figure of divine maternity that's not this big, pregnant, happy Mother Earth, because I never got that. I was always like, what the fuck is this woman? Babalon is a mother, and she's a crone. The thing that she's creating, being a parent when the world is burning is also really difficult. And she also helps me grasp, wow, I'm raising several children to live in a world that might not exist in 50 years. And the ways that I deal with those kind of ideas are going, hey, well, Babalon created a massive cup full of foul abominations and she's okay. So I think she has a really important role with that regard, just in the same way that she is important for the negative aspects of sexuality. She really has that. And I do think that that's maybe something that you could offer some of these women who, I think often the desire to sort of be an occultist is really a desire to have a divinity to work with. People don't really know what that word means. They just feel an impulse. And what they feel an impulse for is a religion that's not Christianity. It's a different kind of relationship with a god. And I think that Babalon actually is a really important, powerful deity for women who are trying to find something else and aren't finding it in any of the figures that they've already got. Maybe I'll write something on that at some point.
Maybe being still a person after being a mom is one of the goals of the woman of the new era.
I think that is very much the case, actually. And funny enough, when you look at a lot of early first wave feminism, Victorian feminism, it was about, choosing not to have children so that you could have a life. But the point was not, well, I just don't like children. The point was that they still wanted to be people. And I think that is something that's often lost from the discourse now. Yeah, that, coming out the other side without losing yourself or without completely reorientating your whole self so that you just serve. Because I see this a lot. What do? I look after my children all day, every day. I make them food and I clean up after them. And when I have 5 minutes, I go clean the floor. Whereas when I have 5 minutes, I sit my ass down and I read, and I tell the children that I'm not talking to them because I'm reading my book right now. And I think, that is, I like that. The aim of the woman is to not lose herself amidst the children.
Yeah. And then I think we can go on and talk about Babalon as a mother. I think it's not spoken often, and it's very important. Like the whore and the mother are one. And how does that work?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was massive for me. Yeah, so I was a single mom with my first son. He wasn't planned. It was a big shock. I was relatively young. And I felt very let down and frustrated by the way that I felt like society said it was my fault. That I should have known better. Some way I should have known better so that this didn't happen. And there was this duality, between the whore and the mother. And it was funny because it's like, okay, so you can't be both, but also you only get to being a mother by being what everybody's calling a whore. And how does this sort of distinction work? And when I came to Babalon, I was like, wow, so she's the whore, she's taking all. But she's also got these children. She's the mother of abominations. She has children. She has results of her whoredom, and we don't talk about that. And I remember desperately searching through all these different Crowley books I had, trying to find a reference to her as a mother. I'm like, Crowley had kids. He must have thought about this. And he didn't. Of course, he had a very difficult relationship with his own mother. So, but yeah, and I definitely think that's one of the most exciting, new spaces of Babalon work to explore.
And then in Templum Abyssi, you wrote new masses where you work with the different veils of Babalon. And I've watched a video where you mentioned how important that is, that women create new rituals and new masses where we are finally allowed to exist as magicians. How does that work in the temple? What are those veils that you chose to use?
You mean of the rituals that I'd already written? So yeah, I wish that I could say that the rituals that I've written were sort of planned in this pre-thought out way to achieve a certain goal, but they were not. Nothing I ever write is, apart from my academic stuff.
And those are the best ones, the ones that we only understand later on.
Oh, very much so, very much so. Yeah, all the best stuff I've ever written, I don't even remember writing. I'm like, I wrote this? Did I write that? Okay. But yeah, so the two, I wrote a ritual called Persephone's Mass, which I called Persephone's Mass because one of the central images was this biting of fruit and this blood dripping down the chin and things that almost wasn't there in the final one, but I didn't feel like I could change its name. That was my first formal ritual, and I guess the liturgy of it, the poems of it came like en masse. And I actually remember I was walking to work and I'm like, oh shit, I better get a notebook out because this is not stopping. This is just, okay, we're doing this. And it's a very powerful ritual. I haven't performed it in almost 3 years, because it embodies a certain, as you say, veil of Babylon as destroyer, and as sort of dominator of men, I suppose. It's a very Babylon as dominatrix, not in a sexual way, but as, you know, an actual dominator sort of thing. That was aspects of what I was exploring with her at that point. But when I came to do it several years later, it didn't feel like it was the right ritual for me personally as a magician to be performing anymore. So it's not that I don't feel like people should do it. It just, you know. I wrote one called Liber Sophia, which was an attempt at something. No, it was sparked by a fascination with the idea of Sophia as a sort of counterpart or sister to Babylon. So not that Sophia's wisdom was Babylon, but that she was sort of the feminine Holy Spirit to Babylon's mother and daughter. I've also heard some people refer to Babylon as the Shekinah, and it kind of played with that idea as well. And what other one? Oh, and I wrote one called The Equinox of the Bees, which was inspired. My magical name is Melitides, which is a title given to Persephone, and it means she who is dripping with honey. And it was inspired from my relationship with myself, I suppose, and that name, and myself as a magician. And that one was actually written for me. It's one of the only ones that I actually wrote for me to do rather than as a public ritual. But it's also one of my favorites. So yeah, I haven't written many rituals recently. They're one of the things that it's hard to do with children, because I would get absolutely obsessed with it for about 3 days and just do nothing else. And it's hard to pick that sort of up and put it down again. But I definitely agree. I mean, stand by those words that women need to be writing their own rituals. And nothing frustrates me more than someone going, "We have a new ritual," and then it's just Crowley quotes, and I'm like, okay, I mean, okay. He's not even that good a poet. I'm like, come on, we could just use like anyone else, anything except another pile of Crowley quotes, another rehashing of the Gnostic Mass. It's not that great a ritual. It doesn't need like 50 new versions. It's a very nice ritual, but I don't think it needs to be done over and over. And I never liked the gender swapped Gnostic Masses, because I felt like it really missed the point, which is, you know, it's not that, you know, controversial or revolutionary to dress people up in the opposite gender's clothes. And that's the only thing that you're doing by gender swapping the Gnostic Mass, is dressing up, sort of spiritually speaking. It's so much more interesting to see what women would come up with themselves as magicians in order to enact that magic. And I hope that people continue to make new ones because I love it. One of my favorite things about the companions is having people go, oh, I wrote this ritual. And I'm like, oh, a new ritual, yes.
Great. So I think we are reaching the end of the thing. I wanted so badly to talk about Dion Fortune. Go on, Thiago.
About Babalon, it's been pretty clear for me now that each one of us have something different to learn from Babalon. But my question remains that, do you think that men and women as a group have different things to learn from Babalon? I mean, some main lesson for men or main lesson for women. Do you think is there something like that?
Yes, I think that there are lessons that everyone can and should learn from her, but I do think that there are lessons that she will teach to men, and I think that there are lessons that she will teach to women, and I think she also has lessons for people who identify as non-binary or have questions about their gender. I think that she invokes or catalyzes an intense self-examination that looks different for everybody. But broadly speaking, we at the temple do agree that there are what you might call masculine and feminine mysteries associated with Babalon that broadly can be seen to be similar to the hero and heroine's journeys. As an idea.
Georgia, you said it was really hard to write books while taking care of children. I think tell us a little bit about your books. Because we're talking about Babalon, and Barbara said you have some amazing books, and I'd like to know a little bit about.
And we can buy them here. We can buy from.
Yes, and where can we find them and all things like that.
Okay, so I wrote.
If there are plans to translate to Portuguese too.
So there are. Okay, let me answer all the questions. So I have 3 books. One just contains some of the rituals that I spoke about. And is much smaller and was published a while ago. Then I published a book full of essays called Approaching Babalon that are also illustrated with art from an artist called Lupe Vasconcelos. They are very philosophical, sort of poetic explorations of different aspects of Babalon. And finally, I wrote one called Babalon Hymnal, which is a collection of poetry and hymns and visions and such like that I experienced in my work with her. They can all be bought on Amazon or on Lulu, if that's your thing, and directly shipped to Brazil. Some friends of mine were working on a Portuguese translation of Approaching Babalon, but they paused working on it because they were in school and it was too many conflicts. I'm hoping that will be something that's picked up again in the future. In the meantime, if people wanted to read some of my work in Portuguese, if you go to my website or the Temple's website, which is templumabyssi.com, there is a bunch of my articles and essays, which some kind people have translated into Portuguese. And I believe there's even the Equinox of the Bee rituals in Portuguese there as well.
Great. And to those who are watching us here, all these links will be on the description of the video down here.
So just to say we didn't, please tell us a little bit about Dion Fortune. Here in Brazil, basically, everything we know about Dion Fortune is the mystical Kabbalah and psychic defense. Besides that, people basically don't know she has written a lot more than that. So can you tell us about your research and the other books you've researched and how important do you think they are and why people should go after them and read them?
I will give you my elevator pitch of Dion Fortune. So I just completed my PhD and my thesis was on Fortune. I was exploring her novels. So she wrote Mystical Kabbalah, which is wonderful, and Psychic Self-Defense. Probably my favorite book, non-fiction book of hers is The Esoteric Philosophy of Love and Marriage, which is very old-fashioned, but if you can get over that, and if you're interested in sexual magic and erotic polarity, that is one of the best texts out there. She was a member of lots of different secret orders and put some things in there that are, just really good. And she really understood what she was talking about. And that's been one of the most influential books for me, full stop. Fortune also wrote 4 novels and a bunch of short stories. Her novels are all occult. And the focus of my thesis was the fact that she actually intended for them to be initiatory. So she thought that if you read her novels, you could experience an initiation into the occult world. And she actually wrote them with the intention that, normal people would read them and get into occultism. She does this with a bunch of different techniques, which is what I explored in my thesis. But the main thing is that they have a very hypnotic quality. And you sort of like get into them and imagine your own versions and want to, enact some of the things she talks about. And that is precisely how she thought they would begin to have an effect. If you've enjoyed the kind of things that we've been talking about today, especially the divine feminine, I would go and recommend that you pick up a copy of The Sea Priestess, which is her most well-known novel, and really explores how people in the 1930s might have begun worshipping Isis at a seaside fortress in Britain. And they're very funny and dry. And the thing about Dion Fortune is she's not terribly well known and she's not super famous, but she, other than Crowley, was the biggest influence on the sort of development of the 20th century occult milieu. Yeah, like things like the obsession with crystals or ley lines. Dion Fortune was the first person to write about ley lines in the contemporary occult milieu. Her ideas of polarity have been hugely influential. Her stuff with Isis and Arthurian legend, so many of the things that she wrote about have come to be massively influential. And I really think when you read them, you can go, oh, wow, that's where that came from. Oh, wow. And yeah, I just absolutely recommend her work to everybody because I think it's wonderful.
Thank you. So besides the book, you also have some online courses and lectures. Tell us about them as well.
Yes. I don't have any lectures. I generally give lectures on things like Crowley, Fortune, sexual magic, Babalon. I don't have any lectures planned right now, but I may give my Babalon lecture again at some point soon. However, starting this August, I am running my first ever course on the history of sexual magic. So it's going to be 8 weeks, 2 months, and we will be exploring sexual magic from a feminist and post-colonial lens, beginning with, the holy whores of the ancient Near East, moving through medieval magic, polarity and alchemy, and into the 20th century to explore Crowley's sexual magic, Dion Fortune's polarity, and less known figures like Pascal Beverly Randolph and Austin Osman Spare. And I'm super excited about it. I have been really obsessed with the concepts and theories of sexual magic for almost 10 years now. It's what I did my master's degree on. It was a major part of my PhD work. So I am just really excited to get to share that with people.
Amazing. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so happy.
We have 2 more questions that we ask all of our guests. Now, Georgia, they're all personal. So the first okay. one, what is magic to you? Your definition, your personal definition.
Magic is a form of relationship between yourself and the world around you. That's a nicely vague one for you.
That's great. And then the last one that this is show number 306. So we asked this question to more than 300 people. Everyone gave us a different answer. So we are betting that whenever we die, we will know the answer. The question is, what in your personal belief happens to us after we die?
We rot and little microbes eat our bodies. And then we become new things like trees and bushes and soil.
All right. Jordan, thank you so much. It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
That was really fun. Thank you.
All right. So, Ulisses Massad, last words.
Nice to meet you, Georgia. It was amazing interview. I learned a lot with you. You have a very nice history, and thank you.
Thiago Tamosauskas.
Oh, thank you very much for your time, your knowledge, and the opportunity for us to learn from you. You are amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Barbara Knox.
So lovely. It was very nice to meet you. I've been a fan for a while, so I'm fangirling all over. Your rhetoric is great. Power of argumentation. Oh my God. I really admire you. Thank you. It was great to be able to ask you all those questions.
I was so happy to answer them. Thank you.
And thank you so much to be here with you, with us. Well, you now have friends in Brazil, so if you ever want to translate your books to Portuguese or publish that or something like that, we can work something out here. The Ecclesia Babalon, they have a great institute, a lot of people who have time and interest in translating stuff like that. And we do have a small publisher house that we usually do crowdfunding stuff. So it's not a lot of books, but small quantities of books. So if you need anything from Brazil, just ask us. Thank you so much for being here.
He does a great job, Georgian. He's being humble, but his publishing house publishes great books with like hardcover and stuff. And the audience is big, so.
I would love to discuss that, definitely.
All right. And to you that watched us, we survived one more English guest. So how do you say it in English? I don't know. You join the channel and press all the buttons and
subscribe.
Yes, press the subscribe button, press like button.
And see you on next Bate-Papo Mayhem.